I will now like to hand over to the Minister for Education, because obviously there are a number of questions that people are asking in light of the lockdown and the post-lockdown period, and we will now like to hand over him to hear about what will happen with the schools. Thank you, Prime Minister. As we have all heard, the 11th of May will mark the end of the lockdown, starting with primary schools and then for the 18th of May for secondary schools. And this is applicable for the green departments. This is for a main reason, is because we have to continue education. It is our social duty to do so. Our students cannot spend more than 2 months away from a direct one-on-one contact with their teachers. It is essential, but it is also for a social need, because we have to avoid people dropping out because of the lockdown. And this is the reason that the French Republic ensures that every child has access to teaching. And we have tried to fill the gap with remote teaching over the past few months. We have come up with a very rigorous health system and health measures that will have to be applied in our schools, and these measures can be checked up on via the National Education website. And these are measures that include protective measures that will have to be implemented in classrooms and will be spread out across all schools in France. We are all aware of the work that this is going to require, and I would like to thank all of the local governments, local mayors, who are also ensuring that our schools will be prepared for the time when students go back to class. A message to all teachers who will have to go back to teaching. Obviously, there will be pre-class meetings for teachers. This is a chance for teachers to be able to speak with each other before the students turn up in the days after. On the 12th of May, students will then be able to go back, again depending on the local context. We won't be able to have all students go back at the same time. There are certain classes that will obviously go back first, grades 1 through 5 and 6. Then other certain students will be able to go back sooner, students with a disability, students or children of medical staff who are being put into childcare during the confinement period. They will be able to go back to school as well. There are currently roughly 30,000 children of medical staff who are in need of classes and need to go back to class. These are the most likely people who run the greatest risk of dropping out, and this is why we have to support them as much as possible to ensure that they will get back to normal schooling as soon as possible. Schools will have to take their own specific measures on how to work that first week. Because this is not really going back to school like at the beginning of the academic year. This is going back to school after an extended time, which has come into the middle of our academic year. And for this, things need to be a little different. Some students will be able to go back to class in small groups, for example, 15 per class for primary school, or more for high schools. We also need specific measures for those students who will not be able to go back to school. Again, we have worked between the ministry and local town halls to come up with other activities for those students not in the classroom, either outdoor sporting activities or civic classes. And these, for those students who are still at home at remote schooling, they will be able to continue their classes, or some students will be entirely in remote, some students will be in and part in class, remote class teaching. The measures will be very different. But again, our priority is to focus as much on those people who have the greatest risk of dropping out. I would just like to make special mention of all of the heads of schools who have been working, again, with our ministry and local governments to ensure that this plan will go ahead. In planning the coming week, we have obviously thought that some teachers will have to stay at home for health reasons, or maybe someone in the family is sick, or maybe they will have to stay home because it was a family decision for them to stay home. Given that not all of our teachers will be able to go back to classes, we have worked with local government to try and ensure that as many schools will be able to open as possible, and 97% of schools have prepared ways for nearly all of their schools to be open next week. Obviously, work is still being put in place to ensure that those schools that do not open next week will be able to open the week after. So what we can see is that a good number of schools will be able to open next week. Not all of them, however, but that will happen in the near future. So for next week, roughly 1 million students will go back to the classroom, with 130,000 teachers to be there to welcome them back. Obviously, we will have to ensure that those students who don't go back to the classroom will be able to continue to have remote teaching. And what I gather is that a lot of families are actually quite happy with the services that we've been able to provide. There are certain areas that we can improve, but we'll be able to continue remote teaching. And again, we'll provide support from our ministry so that all teachers and students will be able to go back to class. We have also put in place a certain psychological service to ensure that those teachers can deal with this going back to school time period. And this is a way where we can have open dialogue so that months of May and June, which are nothing like our regular months of May and June, the end of the academic year, we want them to be as useful as possible for our educational needs of our students, so that our students can get back on the right track and so that they can build on and consolidate all of the knowledge that they have acquired over the past year. Thank you, Minister. I would just like to add something to what you were saying about the green regions, that secondary schools will be able to go back on the 18th of May as we promised.